notorious for being gluttons for punishment. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. We're dealing with the end of a lot of things in the next 5 years. Here's the partial list. We're going to talk about the ones in the blue arrows, but this is basically my life these days. When you end a system, the globalized system, not everything makes it to the other side. Things look different. Some things do better, but everything changes. And the problem is that all of our business plans assume that we're going back to where we were 5 years ago. And that's not in the math. So my goal here today is to give you an idea, some spotlights on the things that definitely won't go back, and how some other things are going to transform and maybe make your life a little bit easier. And we can come back to some of these in Q&A if I don't get to them. So anyway, let's start with the simplest conclusion here. If the product that you need comes on one of these, that's what's going away. Internationalized supply chains, Asia-heavy, transoceanic, trans-Pacific. Anything that is on this, you have to question whether it's ever going to be delivered. We now are in a situation where transformers are 36 to 42 months out. Most of those are probably not going to arrive, and you need to plan accordingly. If it comes on one of these, you're probably okay. Roughly 80% of the trade between America and Mexico is on truck, and there's a number of reasons why that's not great from a logistical point of view, but just for identifying what's going to last. Everything in that category probably will. So there, that's the cheat version. You can go look at your supply chains and make your choices accordingly. Let's go ahead and jump into the rest of it though. I know you guys have seen, everyone here has seen me at least once, right? No. No? Well, okay, this is for you. This is a standard demographic profile. You got children at the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees at the top, men on one side, women on the other. Mortality builds it into a pyramid. And when you have a pyramidal demographic like this, there's a few common characteristics. Number one, it's consumption driven, because populations below age 40 consume a lot. They're raising kids, they're building, or they're buying cars, they're building homes. That spending drives most modern systems, 70% in the case of the United States. But their workers don't have a lot of expertise, so the value add is pretty low. They have to import capital because most capital in a system comes from people over age 40, people who the kids have left home and the house has been paid down. And so in a system like this, consumption driven, low investment, high imports, inflationary. This is Korea in the 50s at the dawn of the globalized era. Globalization meant that we could move off the farm and into towns to take industrial jobs. And when you do that, kids go from being free labor to an expense, and adults aren't dumb, so 2 generations on, here's where the Koreans are now. Very different model. People aged 40 to 65 have decades of work experience. They're capital rich. That pays for investment, that pays for the tax base. But there aren't a lot of young people to consume. So you get a more disinflationary economic model that has to export because there's not enough people locally to buy all this stuff. And the whole world has gone down this Korean path at different speeds from different starting points. But the point is, this capital-rich environment that we become used to, this was always never more than a moment in time. And it ends this decade because everyone in the advanced world is aging out. And later this decade, the Koreans, the Germans, the Italians, the Russians, the Chinese will all age out of being investment rich, and they'll be retirement heavy. And we have no idea what that looks like from an economic point of view. It's never happened in human history, ever. Now, in the United States, we're kind of in the middle, largely because we have more elbow room. And this means that we're in a different situation from everybody else, but that still means some of the same lessons apply. So number one, the boomers are retiring. Largest generation we've ever had, largest worker group we've ever had, largest investment base we've ever had. Half of them have already moved into retirement. The rest will over the next 6 years. And so we know capital costs have to go up. What we've seen so far, we're only about halfway. So capital costs have about tripled in the last 3 years. It's going to triple again. Plan for that. Second, Largest generation ever, another way of saying largest workforce ever. And if you look at the kids at the bottom, the Zoomers, that's our smallest generation ever. It's simple math. Between the boomers leaving and the Zoomers coming in last year, we lost out of the workforce 500,000 workers. It'll be about that same loss again, this year. And that number will increase every year for the next 11 before the annual shortfall peaks at about 900,000 in roughly 2034. Then that number will start to shrink, but we don't expect it to start to grow again in terms of the labor force in large numbers until 2045. So hire, borrow, hire, borrow, hire, borrow. These are the cheapest capital costs and the cheapest labor costs we will have for at least a decade, and in some cases, 2. Third, the quality of the incoming labor is very different. Now, the boomers have dominated everything for so long, we think of their examples as normal. They're a social generation. Their kids, the millennials, are a social generation. The incoming ones, the Zoomers, are not a social generation. They're a little pathological. And they are not group workers. They don't want to work anywhere where they're going to see another person or the sky, which makes it hard for you guys to do what you're going to do. So again, labor is the cheapest and most familiar to you right now that it's going to be for the next 20 years. Hire everyone you can. And then finally, there's technology. Technology as a sector requires 2 things. First of all, scads of people in their 20s and early 30s who have malleable minds, who are social, who can work together, who can imagine the future, and then build that into a prototype and operationalize it and bring it into mass manufacturing. That has been the millennials for the last 20 years. And they're aging out. The oldest millennials this year turn 44. We're starting to see the leading edge of their midlife crises. And it's delicious. But it also means that that younger block of social people just doesn't exist in the way it has in the past. And the second thing you need for tech is capital. Because until you get to that mass manufacturer, there's no income. You have to pay for all of that up front, and the money just isn't there anymore. So even if everything else goes perfectly smoothly, we know we're entering into a tech winter for at least the next 15 years. The pace of advancement is going to slow considerably. That assumes that it doesn't reverse. Here are the big 4 economies that we care about. US is obviously the healthiest of the rich world. Mexico, notice how it goes down? Hits a 30-year-old and then goes straight down. Pros and cons of that model. Basically what you're seeing is Mexico was a latecomer to industrialization. They really didn't start the move from farm to city until NAFTA won in the 90s. Now, if they keep aging at that rate, in 50 years, we're going to have a very big problem. But in the meantime, when you've got a lot of people who are entering their 20s and 30s who don't have a lot of kids, it's a much more consumption-heavy pattern. And so Mexico became our largest trading partner last year. It is a role they will not give up in our lives. There may be some problems down the road in the 2070s. We got time to figure that out, so do they. The Germans do not. The Germans are aging faster than the Koreans. This was always going to be their last decade as an industrial economy. It's not that they're running out of kids. That happened in the 80s. They're now running out of working-aged adults. If you get stuff from Germany, it's time to move on.